Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a moment for everyone to filter in, and then we'll get started. Okay, good morning again, everyone. And thank you for joining us today for stories and best practices for supporting survivors with disabilities. My name is Charlotte Hoff, and I am the Communications and Training Coordinator here at MOVA. I'm just going to go over some logistics quickly before passing it over to our presenters this morning. This is a Zoom webinar, so you cannot be seen or heard as audience members, but you can see the presenters, ASL interpreters, and the presentation. There will be time at the end for questions. If you have questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom toolbar of the Zoom, to ask them, and we will answer them all at the end. We do have ASL interpretation and CART captioning available during today's workshop. To see the closed captions, go to the bottom of the screen in that toolbar, click on the up arrow next to closed caption, and choose Show Subtitle. If you are having trouble seeing the ASL interpreters, closed captions, or have any other tech issues today, please use the chat function to message either myself or my colleague, Brenna Chase, and we will be happy to assist you. If you don't see our names to individually message, you can message all panelists and we'll be able to help you from there. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Allie Talarico is the Impact Ability Coordinator at Impact Boston. Leigh-Ann Barry is a peer support leader at the Disabled Persons Protection Commission. Thank you, Allie and Leigh-Ann, for joining us this morning, and I'll pass it over to you both now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charlotte. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. We will go ahead and get started with our presentation. So we're going to start with some quick introductions, a little bit more about myself and Leigh-Ann and what we do in our work.
I am a woman who has a developmental disability. I'm a sexual assault survivor and a self-advocate. As a peer support leader, I talk to survivors of sexual assault who have a disability and listen to them. I like to share positive quotes with survivors and want to make them feel better. I enjoy talking about self-care activities. It's important for my peers and I to take care of ourselves so we can heal. I also talk to my peers about trauma that can happen. It's important to survivors to know they're not alone, but their feeling is okay.
Thank you so much, Leigh-Ann. And my name is Allie. I use she, her pronouns. I am a program coordinator at Impact Ability, like Charlotte said. My role is I work with individuals with disabilities who are also survivors of trauma. That includes teaching high school students, DDS staff and participants, and also one-to-one clients. I teach curriculum on healthy relationships, sex education, self-defense and self-advocacy, and also internet safety.
Please share your introduction in the chat box, your name, your pronouns, and where you work.
Yeah, wonderful. So we will give you all a few moments, if you're interested, to share your own introductions in the chat box. And Charlotte, as introductions come in, would it be possible to share a few places that people are coming from where they work?
Yeah, so I'm seeing a few people from DPPC, Portal to Hope, the Berkshire County District Attorney's Office, a few of our MOVA staff, DDS, a state rep, a lot of people from DPPC.
We do have another state rep on the call.
Oh, awesome. Probation, Harbor Cove, Bristol County DA's office, Greater Boston Legal Services.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, and I'm sure there's plenty more that are coming in. Yeah, please feel free to share with each other and where you work. But thank you so much for reading some of those out loud. So I'm going to give everyone a quick rundown of what our agenda is for our training today. We're going to start by talking a little bit about disabilities. We will then segue into talking about trauma and survivorship. We are going to hear Leigh-Ann's personal story, as well as Leigh-Ann's do's and don'ts when working with survivors with disabilities. We will talk a little bit about best practices to support survivors, and we'll talk about some important tenets of trauma-informed care. And finally, we will end with some questions and closing. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about disabilities. Some folks here may be very familiar with the disability community and work with folks regularly with disabilities, and others may not be as familiar. So we'll look here at just a couple different things about disabilities. A disability is often categorized by a limitation or impairment in one's learning, behavior, social adaptation, sight, hearing, communication, etc. What I'd like to say right off the bat with that definition of disabilities is that I do want to call attention to the words limitation and impairment, because for some people that could be seen as very ableist, and we will be talking a little bit about ableism, because this definition is kind of given to us in comparison to neurotypical people or people without disabilities. So if a neurotypical person is comparing themselves to a person with a disability, they may call a disability a limitation or an impairment. But for a lot of folks with disabilities, they may feel like their disability doesn't hold them back at all, and that it's just a part of who they are. So I just wanted to call attention to that, because sometimes the language that people might use in definitions or in the medical community may not feel accurate to a person's own interpretation of their disability and of their identity. There are many different kinds of disabilities. We'll go over a few of these in the next slide. And also, some people identify as disabled or as a person with a disability, and others do not. It is fully up to each individual person how they identify and how they choose, if they choose whether or not to disclose if they have a disability. So we have a couple things listed here about types of disabilities or different abilities that people may have. There are, some people have intellectual disabilities, there are developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, learning disabilities, neurological disorders, mental and emotional disorders. Some folks are blind or have low vision. Some folks are deaf or hard of hearing. And this is not an exhaustive list. There's also more than all of these. Some of the things that sort of define some of these disabilities might be differences in ways people communicate. Some things that might categorize a disability is people like thinking or interpreting information in different ways, people comprehending information in different ways. Some people need a lot of support. Others need not so much support. Some people may have difficulty learning certain subjects. Some people may have physical disabilities that involve needing support with movement or going to different places. And it's important to keep in mind that even if people have these disabilities, that people with disabilities are also still just completely human, just like neurotypical people. And some people like to define themselves by their disability. Some people may choose to define themselves as a person with a disability, but other people may choose to define themselves as a person first, and that a disability is just part of who they are. That kind of brings us into this next slide here about things that it's important to keep in mind. It's important to understand that everyone's experience with a disability is going to be completely different. Folks with disabilities are not a monolith, as we know. Even if you have two people who have an intellectual disability, their experiences are going to be so incredibly vastly different from one another. Everyone with a disability is going to have a different life experience. Disabilities can be visible or invisible. Someone's disability may be something that you can see on the outside. There are some folks who might have physical disabilities or use a wheelchair or things like that. But disabilities can also be invisible. Someone on the outside may present or be assumed to be a neurotypical person or a person without a disability. But you can't tell just by looking at a person if they have a disability or if there are things that they struggle with. To go back to that identity part of disability, the third bullet here I wanted to bring attention to as well. Person first and identity first language are valid ways to self-identify. I think a lot of times as a best practice, all of us as providers and educators, people who are often working with the disability community, we are often taught to default to person first language. So for example, saying that, oh, Sam is a person with a disability. Kira is a person with autism. However, and some people may identify that way. But it's incredibly important to listen to what a person with a disability says to you in terms of their identity. Some people prefer and want to be identified depending on their identity. Someone may prefer to say, oh, I am Sam and I am a disabled person. I am Kira and I am an autistic person. And so that is also a completely valid way for people to self-identify. It's very important that you ask the person, that you ask each individual how they want to identify instead of correcting them or telling them, oh, well, you should identify this way. You should identify person first. Not everyone chooses to. So just as a reminder, person first and identity first language are valid ways to self-identify. And finally, it's important to understand that people with disabilities can and do live meaningful, successful lives. It is sometimes assumed that folks with disabilities will have a lower quality of life, but this is just not true. People with disabilities can and do live incredibly successful lives, can achieve things that they want to do, can set goals, can learn, like all the same things that people without disabilities can do. And so it's important to remember to give people with disabilities their own autonomy, to support their autonomy, and remember that they are also a person with like feelings and goals, and just like any other person. A few more things to remember and that we should understand. Adults with disabilities are adults and deserve to be spoken to with respectful, age-appropriate language. Do not use baby talk or infantilizing language to talk to a person with a disability. This is something I've experienced in my own work with clients, and a lot of folks have let me know that how incredibly frustrating their experience can be sometimes when talking to neurotypical people without disabilities, when talking to like medical professionals, when talking to staff or educators, or even just peers or family. Sometimes people may be really well-intentioned and want to dumb down kind of what they're saying to a person with a disability, but that doesn't need to be done. An adult with a disability is still an adult. They are not a child. And so it's very important to speak to people at in accordance with the age that they are. It's important that we don't talk down to people just because they have a disability. That can be really infantilizing and unfair and disrespectful. And finally, ableism is real and it is harmful. For folks who are not familiar, ableism, a few things that ableism means is it can mean judging someone before you know them. And ultimately, ableism is when people assume that folks with disabilities cannot do certain things. And so it's important to remember there's a lot of times that people who are able-bodied and people who do not have disabilities, there are a lot of things that folks take for granted. And a lot of our world is built for people without disabilities. And so when organizations or people refuse to accommodate people with disabilities, whether that's in a learning capacity or a physical capacity or access to a building or transportation, refusing to and not being willing to accommodate people with different abilities is ableism. And that can be very harmful, like physically and emotionally for people with different disabilities. So now that we've talked a little bit about, we've given a little overview about disabilities and how varied and how different they can be, we are going to talk a little bit about trauma and survivorship. A lot of folks here are probably already familiar, but we are going to be talking about what is trauma. We're going to talk about common reactions to trauma, what can trigger past trauma, and finally, we're going to talk about what does it look like when someone is triggered. Because a lot of things involving trauma, whether it's reactions or triggers, can look the same for people with and without disabilities. So, what is trauma? Trauma is when our nervous system is so incredibly overwhelmed by something that it can affect someone physiologically, like with their body, cognitively, with their brain or their mind or their thinking. It can affect someone emotionally, behaviorally, spiritually, and in their relationships with other people. So in short, experiencing trauma or feeling traumatized is when our brains and bodies and nervous systems experience too much of something much too quickly. It can feel incredibly, incredibly overwhelming. There are a lot of things that can lead to trauma. In fact, anything can lead to trauma if it is perceived to be life-threatening, life-altering, life-diminishing, or life-deadening. This is to say, trauma isn't defined by the event, but rather by the survivor's experience of it. So like I said, anything can lead to trauma. Two people might experience the same trauma and have two completely different reactions or outcomes to that trauma. A parent's divorce can be traumatic for someone. Surviving a natural disaster can be traumatic and can cause people to experience trauma. Two people, like I said, two people can go through the same traumatic experience. One person can be totally fine and maybe develops healthy coping skills and doesn't really feel any adverse effects from whatever the event was. And other people, so the other person may feel incredibly overwhelmed, like they might feel very changed and altered by that, whatever that traumatic event was. So it's important to realize that anything can lead to trauma, that trauma can affect really anyone. whether you're a person with or without a disability. And trauma can be very harmful and very life-changing and life-altering. I'm going to read here a few common reactions to trauma. People who experience trauma might experience feelings of self-blame, anger, fear, the inability to remember things, and the inability to even remember the traumatic event, sadness, loss of control, flashbacks to the trauma, nightmares, depression or anxiety, changes in connection to one's body and the way that they physically feel, whether they can feel grounded and present in the moment, difficulty concentrating. Someone might feel very jumpy. Someone may experience disassociation, which I'll talk about in a moment. And people may also feel powerless. Being a survivor of trauma can lead people to feel or experience some, none, or all of these things. Disassociation is a word that means someone literally separating from the present moment. If someone disassociates, usually as a reaction to trauma, it means that they may not even be aware of where they are or what they're doing. It's as if they're maybe transported back into a different moment or a different time. They might lose sense of time and not realize that they're in the present moment, and instead may be flashing back to times of trauma. A few more common reactions to trauma: loss of interest in preferred activities, slower processing of thoughts and speech, avoiding certain people or places, suicidal thoughts, significant change in baseline mood, fear of people, places, or activities that is out of line with what might be expected, and finally, avoidance of doctor visits or assistance with activities of daily living. So some of these feel especially significant when we think about survivors who are also people with disabilities. So for example, significant change in baseline mood. That can be a reaction to trauma that happens in a person with or without a disability. But it's important to remember here, a lot of times when folks work with people with disabilities, there are some folks who may experience or exhibit certain behaviors. Some people are on things like behavior plans. And sometimes as a reaction to trauma, some folks with disabilities may exhibit like unwanted behaviors, or they might exhibit things that staff are calling behaviors, when in actuality, it's a reaction to trauma. And so it can be very difficult and very frustrating if staff are reacting only to a behavior and not thinking about, okay, what could be underlying this behavior? A lot of times if someone is reacting to trauma, they may be reacting or exhibiting a behavior, not because they want to, not purposefully, but because it is, like we said, a reaction to trauma. Someone may be like experiencing flashbacks or fear from a traumatic event that causes them to act a certain way. And so it's important, especially when we get to our section on being trauma informed, it's important that staff and providers and educators keep in mind that sometimes reactions to trauma may look like behaviors, may look like unwanted behaviors. And it's important to realize that sometimes behaviors may come as a result to a trauma or being triggered by trauma. So what triggers trauma responses and memories? A trigger is something that reminds a survivor of the trauma they experienced. Many different things can trigger trauma responses. It could be something really small or really big. It can be a sound, smell, taste, place. It could be something a person says. It could be the way a person looks. So really anything can trigger a trauma response. If someone's in the same place that a traumatic event happened, that can trigger trauma. So really, really anything can be a trigger. When someone is feeling triggered, they may respond in a variety of ways. They may react in some of these ways. At some points, they may react in some of these ways during different traumas. Some people might not really experience any of these triggered reactions at all. Some people, when they're triggered by trauma or they're remembering trauma, may start to laugh. They may cry. They may feel unsettled. They may look or feel like a deer in headlights, where they're sort of frozen in the moment and don't know what to do. Someone who is triggered might feel angry or frustrated. They may have difficulty with physical coordination. They might have a completely blank expression. They might run out of the room or run away from something or try to avoid something or someone. And like we talked about before, they may disassociate completely. If someone is triggered, they may sort of lose track of where they are or who they are or what they're doing as their brain or their mind tries to protect them from whatever trauma that they are remembering or reliving or being triggered by. So we've talked a little bit about disabilities. We've talked about what trauma is, what can trigger trauma, and what some common reactions to trauma are. And now we are going to hear from our lovely Leigh-Ann about her personal experiences in her work and her survivorship.
Today I would like to share you with my story. By sharing my story with you, I'm able to take control of my life. I also am able to let peers know it is okay. I was raped by someone who was talking to online. When I was raped, the process I had to go through was not easy. I felt scared, angry, and alone. At the hospital after the assault, I didn't know what was going to happen. I felt that no one was talking to me. All the communication from the medical staff was going to my parents instead of me. I was frustrated they were not looking at me or talking to me because I have a disability. I didn't want my parents to know everything. No one asked me what I wanted and what I thought. The support by my counselor helped me heal. Someone who was actually listening to me and asking me how I felt and what I wanted. Being a survivor is difficult at the same time. It has made me a stronger and wiser person. Today, I am not as trusted of people that I don't know. I am also a stronger person because I'm able to handle life's difficulties a little easier. I am working at my dream job now at the Sexual Assault Response Unit at Disabled Persons Protection Commission. I am on the DPPC Teamwork Committee. I share my story throughout public speaking events, conferences, and trainings statewide. I meet with survivors of sexual assault that have a disability. I educate professionals how to work with individuals who have a disability. I've created a self-care bingo game. So these are the do's to work with people with disabilities. Talk slowly, explain things in a simple way, talk to the survivor directly, explain who you are in a simple way, make sure survivors don't get what they want. If you don't understand them, ask them to repeat. All survivors, if they want their support staff in the room, if they don't, right away, give them the time to respond. Contact the survivor to a rape crisis center, but make sure the rape crisis center area. Make sure you know your responsibility of a mandated reporter. See, these are don'ts that you don't do with people with disabilities. Don't assume what the survivor wants. Do not share information with support staff or families if the survivor doesn't want you to. Do not touch the survivor if they don't want to be touched. Do not be scared of this to talk to a survivor. Do not be afraid to ask how you can help. Do not take the person of the survivor do not take it personal if the survivor does not want to talk to the doctor in the room. Sorry.
Oh my gosh, don't be sorry. That was great. Thank you for sharing your story and also your do's and don'ts. I think these are incredibly important to hear.
You're welcome.
So we've just heard from Leigh-Ann, her personal story in being a survivor, her path to healing, her best practices for do's and don'ts of working with survivors. And so now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into trauma-informed care best practices and some more of those do's and don'ts when working with survivors with disabilities. So let's look at what trauma-informed care means and what it means to be trauma-informed. An organization or a person who practices trauma-informed care is aware of the lasting effects of traumatic events and how this can impact people, mind, body, and spirit. A trauma-informed approach means using non-judgmental words and body language, validating people's emotions, letting people know that their emotions are, that it's okay to feel whatever it is that they feel, creating safe spaces, actively listening, and believing survivors when they disclose trauma. Something that can be incredibly helpful when if a person discloses trauma to you. One of the most powerful and helpful things that you can do in the very moment that someone discloses is thanking them for telling you. Thanking them for sharing something so personal or scary. And that's a sign that that person sees you as a safe or trusted person to go to. So believing survivors especially is incredibly important to helping someone to get through trauma and to get through whatever event has happened. Being trauma-informed means providers should assume that the person seeking support knows best what they need. Someone may disclose and they may share like what they want and what they don't want. And it's important for people who are staff or providers or educators or mandated reporters to not try to force a survivor to do something that they don't want to do. It's really important that we listen to the survivor's voice or however it is that they are communicating with us, because they know best what they need and how they are feeling. So it's important that we don't ever try to force people to, get help from a certain person if they don't want to talk to a certain person. There may be things that they have to do, which kind of brings us into our second bullet here. Offer predictability and choice in schedules and activities whenever possible. So let's say someone discloses something and perhaps they have, maybe it's a situation where you have to tell that person's guardian or you have to tell the DPPC what happened. And that can feel very scary for a person disclosing or a person who's looking for help. They might not want to tell someone. In the event that, because for folks who are mandated reporters, in the event that we have to tell someone, it can be really helpful to offer choice as much as possible when it comes to disclosing and getting help. So let's say a person with a disability discloses that they are a survivor or that they have experienced or are currently experiencing some kind of trauma. Perhaps in that moment we think, okay, we need to tell the DPPC that this happened. So something that could be helpful in offering choice in that moment is letting that person know, I have to let the DPPC know what happened. Would you like me to call them by myself, or would you like to call them, or would you like to be in the room with me while I call? So that's a way that we can offer choice, even in a situation where perhaps something like calling someone or getting help needs to be done. Perhaps a report does need to be made, but we can start to return a person's feeling of control to them by offering them choices. So in a situation like that, giving someone the choice if they want to be in the room or not while that call to the DPPC is being made is already a way that we can help to restore like a sense of control and choice to a person who has just experienced something where there was a loss of control. And along with this, I want to say a few more things on this second bullet here about offering choice in schedules and activities. I know that it can be incredibly difficult to get everyone everything that they want to need. It can be very hard, especially when working with folks with disabilities or working in day programs or working in group homes. There's often not enough time or enough staff to accommodate every single desire that a person has. And which I totally understand. There's only so much that we as staff and as providers can do. And so even when we have a limited amount of things that we can, even when we have a limited amount of choices to give to folks, there are still plenty of places where we can offer choice to help reestablish a sense of control and choice in someone's life. So for example, let's say in someone's schedule, let's say someone has to take a shower on a certain day. It's Tuesday, so-and-so you have to shower. So there isn't a choice about showering. However, would you like to shower now or after dinner? So even just giving a choice such as time that an event is happening, it's that event or that thing has to happen, such as like taking a shower, but being able to offering choice on when that happens, again, can just be a small empowering way that we help to give someone a sense of choice and control. And also offering predictability. Even if folks have the same schedule every single day, even if people can expect and do the same thing every day, maybe someone leaves for program at 9 a.m, they come back at 3, the same staff is there every day from 3 o'clock on, they have dinner at the same time, activity at the same time. Even if someone's schedule is the same every single day, letting folks know, reminding them what their schedule is and what they can expect throughout their day. Even if it's the same thing every single day and they're used to, they know what to expect, reminding someone that, okay, this is what your schedule is and how the day is going to go, can offer someone a sense of feeling reassured, right? It can be really jolting and uncomfortable if someone's schedule changes very quickly or without notice. And so it's really important that we offer predictability and maintain structure. And if plans do change, as inevitably they usually do, a staff member might be sick or not be able to come in, a rainy day might cancel an outdoor activity. When changes like that occur, it's important that we as staff members and providers don't assume that everyone already knows all of the changes that are happening. Some people might be aware that, oh, this change is happening because of the weather, or so-and-so is out today, so our schedule is changing. Other people might not make that connection and might need to be explicitly told, our schedule is changing today because of X, Y, and Z. So here's what we're going to do instead. Here's what you can expect for the day. I know that this is a change in our normal schedule, and then that can feel uncomfortable that the schedule is different. But we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and tomorrow we can expect this, or we'll go back to our normal things that we do. So maintaining structure and offering, when things change, letting people know can be really helpful. So again, someone doesn't feel like they are losing control or in a situation where they don't have control. Maintaining boundaries and helping people to form boundaries can also be a really helpful trauma-informed practice. Boundaries are incredibly important. And a lot of times folks don't get to choose where they live. A lot of times people may be placed in group homes and they don't necessarily get to choose where they live. And so making sure that there are clear boundaries in place and that people know that they can set boundaries can also be very helpful so that a person feels like they have control over their own space and over their own body. So for example, in a group home, making sure that we don't barge into someone's, into an individual's room without knocking first. Something as small as that, walking into a room without knocking, could be a trigger for someone. And so making sure that we are respecting, teaching, and maintaining boundaries. Things like, knocking on a door before coming in, asking someone if they need help with something before we try to help them or try to do some kind of a helping touch, something to help them, making sure that we're communicating with people and encouraging people to have their own boundaries, as well as reminding them to respect others' boundaries. Usually if some kind of a trauma occurs, it's because a boundary wasn't respected. And so that's why it's especially important to help people feel empowered to make and to maintain boundaries. Building connections can be incredibly helpful for folks with disabilities who are survivors. It can be really, really helpful for people to build connections and connect with people who perhaps also have disabilities, people who are also survivors. Finding friendship and being able to relate with others can be really helpful to remind people that they're not alone in their experiences and that they have support and there are other people who have experienced things that they have. And finally, a lot of this has led into, and a lot of what I've already shared here kind of adds to this last bullet here, helping survivors regain a sense of control. All of these things that I just mentioned are all things that can help a survivor to regain a sense of control. We want them to feel in control of actions and things that happen around them and schedules that happen around them. And like I said before, there might be areas where we don't necessarily get to give choice. And so if there are things that people don't have a choice about, it's important that we're supplementing other things with choices when we can, so that a person doesn't feel like every single decision is being made for them and they don't have control over anything. We're going to talk a little bit about adrenaline management, because adrenaline management is something that can be a very trauma-informed way for both staff and providers to help themselves and stay calm and de-escalated in a moment where an individual is escalated. And that can also help a person who is feeling escalated or triggered. It's important to take care of ourselves as well as support individuals in taking care of themselves. One way that we can do this is we can work with individuals regularly on identifying their emotions and identifying coping skills that work for them. In a few moments, Leigh-Ann and I have a list of some different adrenaline management tactics. It's important for us all to remember that not every single coping skill or adrenaline management technique is going to work for each person. Some people may respond really positively to some deep breathing exercises. Other people may feel like deep breathing is not helping them to feel better or to de-escalate. So it's important to have a variety of things, to practice a variety of coping skills and work with each individual person on what works for them. It's important that we don't expect one coping skill to be a one-size-fits-all thing that works for every person. Some people may de-escalate better if they are able to go for a walk, if they're able to take some space to draw or to write, if they're able to listen to music, if they're able to talk to a person that they trust, if they're able to do some grounding techniques or some touching or tapping pressure points to help ground us in the present moment. So it can be really helpful to regularly help individuals identify how they're feeling in the moment and identify skills that work personally for them. And finally, practicing these coping skills in low stress situations is very important and very helpful so that these individuals can then call on these skills in high stress adrenalized situations. So what I mean by this is, maybe it's like a nice quiet afternoon and you encourage someone you work with to practice some of the coping skills that they like. That can be really helpful to do in a low stress situation, because sometimes when we are very stressed out, the adrenaline is pumping through our bodies, sometimes we can't think straight. And so it's sometimes not helpful to try to use an adrenaline management skill only in a time of high stress, because that person might not even be able to focus on what the skill is. They might not know what to do. And if they haven't practiced that skill beforehand, they might not be able to recall it in the moment where they're feeling, way, way up here. So practicing in low stress situations can be helpful to start to instill some kind of muscle memory of those coping skills, so that in a high stress situation, we can encourage folks, hey, remember that coping skill that we were working on? I can see that you're very upset right now. Do you want to do some deep breaths together? Would you like me to give you some space? And then we can practice some adrenaline management, things like that. So I'm going to read out loud here a list of some adrenaline management techniques that Leigh-Ann and I both use when we work with folks. I'm going to read these here, and Leigh-Ann is going to lead us through one of these, and I will also lead us through one of these. So we've got a few adrenaline management techniques here. Some people, for coping skills and adrenaline management, might practice or encourage people to do deep intentional breathing. People might do an adrenaline management skill called 5 senses, which I believe Leigh-Ann's going to be explaining for us. People might do tapping, and that one, like when we tap parts of our body in really gentle ways, this can be a really helpful coping skill, especially if someone is disassociating and they feel like they are not grounded in the present moment. Tapping and bringing ourselves back to the present can be really helpful. Identifying points of contact. Noticing, again, this is another grounding skill, noticing where parts of your body are touching solid, firm things, feeling your back or your bottom sitting in your chair, feeling your feet on the floor, and recognizing that you're in the present moment and that you're in a safe place. Using positive imagery to help someone to calm down. Sometimes taking a moment to just see in our mind's eye something or someone that makes us feel calm and centered and happy can help people to come down and de-escalate. Taking movement breaks, different, whether that's taking a walk, stretching, wiggling out your arms, your legs, or your hands, or your feet. Sometimes people just they might be feeling overstimulated and want to get that energy out. And finally, there's icebreaker activities or little games that people can play to sort of disrupt that feeling of escalating. Taking a moment to instead try to play a game or do an icebreaker activity can help people to focus on something else. Yeah, so Leigh-Ann, would you like to bring us through one of these adrenaline management techniques that you use?
Well, I'd love to. So I do a support group for people of sexual assault. So we do grounding techniques at the end of every session. So we do the 5 senses. So our first one is sight. So we have pictures of animals and we ask, what do you see? What calms you down? Our second one is music. I have a positive list that I listen to when I'm stressed out. So we play that. Our third one, I'm not sure because I don't do it. And our last one's taste, like we bring a snack or we ask what their favorite food is and why, like how does it taste when you're feeling stressed out. So we do the 5 senses.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for describing that, because I think sometimes bringing our attention to things other than the feeling of being adrenalized and nervous and heightened. Sometimes if we're able to disrupt that and think of what our senses are experiencing, whether that's touch or taste or smell or sound, can be really helpful. Excuse me. And one that I would like to take everyone through is we're going to do a little activity on the identifying points of contact. And so what I'll do for this, if folks would like to follow along, you're more than welcome to. You don't have to if you don't want to. If you would like to follow along, I'll invite people to close their eyes if that's comfortable. And if that's not comfortable, you can feel free to either look down or you can focus on something in the room that makes you feel calm or something that you feel like you can look at to focus on. What I would like you to do is just take a few breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. And as you're breathing, you don't have to change the speed of your breathing. Some people might be breathing really slowly. Some people might be breathing really quickly. And the point of this grounding skill is not to change the way we're breathing, but first just to notice. Just noticing that feeling of the breath moving in through our nose and out through our mouth. And as you're breathing, I want you to notice and be aware of the feeling of your feet on the ground. As you're sitting or laying or standing, your feet may be on the ground right now. They may be sort of tucked underneath you as you're sitting. Your feet may be up on a table or chair. And just notice where your feet or your shoes are touching like the furniture or the ground around you. We'll move up from our feet to our legs and notice where your legs are touching a chair or a surface or the floor that you're sitting on. And all the while, we're going to keep breathing in through our nose and out through our mouth. I want you to notice where your arms or your hands are touching something else. Maybe your hands, the palms of your hands are resting on your thighs. They might be resting on the chair that you're sitting on. Perhaps you feel your back against your chair. And just sort of wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers. Feel all these places where your body is touching something that is solid and firm and here in the moment. Know that you are in a safe place, that we are grounded, that we are here in the present moment. We'll take 1 or 2 more deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. And when you feel ready, feel free to open your eyes and kind of come back to this moment here. So sometimes an activity like that, identifying points of contact, and it was also kind of mixed in with doing some intentional breathing, can be helpful to, again, like disrupt the moment. This could be done before, during, or after someone is in like a heightened state. For some people, they might be able to do this in the middle of it and it helps them to calm down. Other people might not be able to do it in the middle of feeling triggered or anxious or upset, and they might need to wait until they come down and then do it afterwards to sort of relax and decompress and de-escalate. So why trauma-informed care? Trauma-informed care is better for everyone. Those who have not previously experienced trauma may be more likely to seek support when people are actively practicing trauma-informed care. If individuals see that their staff members and their providers and their educators are actively listening to them, helping them to notice their emotions, validating their emotions, helping them through adrenalized and escalated times, when people notice that their staff are really supporting them in ways like that, people may feel comfortable enough to disclose if they haven't previously disclosed, or if there was a time in the future that they did experience trauma, they may be more likely and feel more comfortable to reach out for support. Like I said, survivors who have not disclosed may be more likely to seek support if staff and providers are using trauma-informed care. By being trauma-informed and using trauma-informed care, we are being flexible and emotionally accessible, which can help us to provide better services. And finally, something that we already mentioned earlier in our presentation here is that you can't tell by looking at a person if they are a survivor of trauma. So there might be some places where there might be some group homes or day programs or organizations or places where we know, oh, you know, so-and-so who comes here has experienced trauma and we want to make sure we support them. But we also want to make sure we support everyone. We want to support those who have experienced trauma. We want to support those who we don't know if they've experienced trauma, because you could very well be working with people who are survivors, but either they don't know that they're survivors, they might know but don't want to share. So it's very important that we practice trauma-informed care and that we are flexible, that we are attentive to people's emotions, and that we practice coping skills, that we try to give choice as much as possible, because these are things that can help to empower a person. and help people feel like, especially folks with disabilities who often don't get to make choices about what they do and where they live. Being trauma informed can help people to feel comfortable, to feel like they can make choices. And you can't tell by looking at a person if they're a survivor. And so being trauma informed can help us take better care of everyone and provide helpful services for everyone, because we are not making assumptions of whether someone's a survivor or not. So that brings us to the end of our formal presentation piece here. Leigh-Ann and I would like to thank you all so very much for listening and for joining. And we would love to, if anyone has any questions or comments, we would love to answer some of those now for you all.
Thank you so much, Leigh-Ann and Allie. So if you have any questions, just use the Q&A function at the bottom. I'd be happy to answer them.
Allie, Jamie said thank you.
Jamie said thank you?
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, thank you for being here.
Leigh-Ann, what has been the most rewarding part of working with the Sexual Assault Response Unit?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
No problem. What has been the most rewarding part of working with the Sexual Assault Response Unit?
So the most rewarding is that I'm helping people who've been recently sexually assaulted, because I know how they feel, and I just like to help them feel better. So I'm really, really happy that they hired me. I love my job. Like I said, I really love it.
And just someone saying, as a disabled survivor myself, this was a really fantastic presentation. Thank you. So,
yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Okay, so if there's any other questions, oh, there we go. As an advocate in the legal system, do you have any pointers on how we can better advocate for survivors to our prosecutors?
That is an excellent question. I will preface by saying I definitely don't have a ton of experience or advice like myself and my own experience with the legal side of things. But I know that one of the things that and I'm not sure if this is helpful at all, but I know that one of the things that we really stress when we are teaching, when I'm teaching lessons on sex education, and specifically because all of the folks that I work one-on-one with are survivors with disabilities. A lot of times it can be really triggering when we do sex ed lessons, but it's important. And I usually preface things by saying that this can be really difficult to talk about, and we'll take breaks and things like that. But one of the things that's very important that we do, and that all folks should do when they're teaching sex ed or talking about like topics that have to do with sex and anatomy and things like that, is using the like the actual words for like private body parts. So I know that there are like times when I know that a lot of people are taught when they're kids to use sort of slang words for body parts. And sometimes things like that like may or may not hold up in a court, or may not be able to, what someone might not be able to define, what is a hoo-ha or down there, like if we're not using the right actual terms. And so being able to help survivors with disabilities really like use the correct language and learn about sex ed topics in trauma informed ways. My hope is that would be helpful in a court system where someone can say like, so like this happened, and like using the actual words like penis and vagina and things like that, so that there's no question of what the like body part was or what happened. So I'm not sure if that's helpful at all in terms of like advocating and helping to support a survivor in court. I'll have to look into some additional resources because that is a very good question. Say again, Leigh-Ann?
I have something to add when you're done. So I had 2 trials, and what helped me to go through my trials that my lawyer, like the week before my child took me around the court. It's like, oh, this is where the judge sits. This is where, I don't know, like the people who make the decision, the jury sits. This is where you're going to be. So she like showed me where everybody is. And that relieved a lot of my anxiety.
That is a fantastic point, and thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like that kind of ties back to offering people like predictability and help. I can imagine that really helped to like calm your nerves, knowing what the space looked like and like where people were going to sit and who was going to be there.
Jamie put in the chat and some other helpful information that I'll just read out loud in answer to this question. One thing we can all do is work together to reduce barriers and increase access for all avenues of justice. Utilizing support teams, speaking with survivors, and understanding what they need to move through legal proceedings. Keep it as simple as possible and ensure the survivor knows what will happen when and what that means. That's great advice.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So if there's any final questions, please do feel free to continue using the Q&A and we'll be happy to keep answering them. I just want to thank you both again. Thank you for a great presentation, and thank you, Leigh-Ann, for sharing your story. It was really, really impactful and very informative, the presentation. So this is the last week of Victim Rights Month. We do have 2 more workshops, one tomorrow and one Friday. So tomorrow is about working with survivors who are part of the LGBTQ and gender diverse community. And then Friday is a closing keynote from Audrey Morrissey from My Life, My Choice. So Brenna just put in the chat the link to register for those if you're interested, and also a feedback form just briefly to give us some feedback on this workshop. We'll also share the feedback form and the slides from today in a follow-up email as well.
Yeah, and if anyone thinks of any like questions directly related to anything that Leigh-Ann or I shared today, we have on this slide here the emails or phone numbers that you can reach us by. I know that for myself, I would definitely be much more responsive to email because due to the pandemic, I haven't been in my office for a year. So if you leave a message, it might be some time till I get back to it.
Well, I don't see any more questions, so I think we'll wrap up. But as Allie just said, feel free to reach out in the future with questions. And thank you both again for presenting. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.